Slavery is one of humanity's darkest chapters. Its history stretches back thousands of years, touching nearly every corner of the globe and shaping societies in profound and often brutal ways. Today, we're going to explore the complete history of slavery on our planet, from its ancient origins to its ongoing legacy in the modern world. This is a story not just of oppression, but also of resistance, resilience, and the unyielding fight for freedom. Let's begin. Slavery has existed for as long as human civilization. The history records date back to around 3100 BCE in Mesopotamia. Here, slaves were often prisoners of war, debtors, or criminals, forced to labor under harsh conditions. In ancient Egypt, slaves built monumental structures like the pyramids. Contrary to popular belief, not all workers were enslaved, but those who were lived under strict control. In classical Greece and Rome, slavery became institutionalized. Enslaved people were central to agriculture, mining, and even domestic life. Some, like the gladiators of Rome, were even forced to entertain. During the Middle Ages, slavery took on new forms. In Europe, serfdom emerged, where peasants were bound to the land and their lords. Meanwhile, the Islamic caliphates engaged in the trans-Saharan slave trade, transporting millions from Africa to the Middle East. Even the Vikings participated, capturing and trading slaves across northern Europe. Slavery was not confined to one region, it was a global phenomenon. The Transatlantic slave trade was one of the most devastating chapters in human history. Beginning in the 16th century, millions of Africans were forcibly taken from their homelands and shipped across the Atlantic under horrific conditions and sold into slavery in the Americas. This trade created a triangular system. European goods were exchanged for African slaves, who were then sent to Americas to produce commodities like sugar, cotton, and tobacco. These goods were then sent back to Europe, fueling industrial growth. But behind the statistics are countless human stories of pain, survival, and resistance. Enslaved people rebelled, escaped, and found ways to preserve their cultures despite unimaginable hardships. But how did the transatlantic slave trade compare to earlier systems of slavery? Most historians agree it was markedly worse in several ways. First, its scale was unprecedented, forcibly removing an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans over 4 centuries and devastating entire regions. Second, it was distinctly racialized, creating a system where Africans and their descendants were dehumanized and treated as property in perpetuity. The brutality of the Middle Passage, where millions died in horrific conditions, and the systemic violence on plantations made this form of slavery uniquely cruel. Unlike earlier systems, where enslaved individuals could sometimes integrate into society, the transatlantic slave trade institutionalized generational slavery. How does this compare to the trans-Saharan slave trade? While the trans-Saharan trade also involved significant cruelty, it differed in scale and methods. Over centuries, more than 11 to be exact, an estimated 12 to 20 million Africans were taken, often enduring harsh conditions on long desert journeys with high mortality rates. In the trans-Saharan trade, many enslaved men were forcibly castrated, a procedure that caused immense suffering and death for a large percentage of those subjected to it. However, some enslaved individuals in the Islamic world gained paths to freedom or social mobility, particularly through military or domestic service. This contrasts with the Transatlantic's trade systemic racialization and generational slavery, where African descendants were perpetually enslaved. Both trades were extraordinarily cruel, but the transatlantic slave trade's racial ideology, industrial scale, and long-lasting impact on global systems make it uniquely devastating. By the late 18th century, the world began to change. Enlightenment ideals of liberty and equality inspired abolition movements. Figures like Olaudah Aquino, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Tubman became powerful voices against slavery. Countries like Britain outlawed the transatlantic slave trade in 1807, and slavery itself in 1833. But why did Britain, a nation so deeply entrenched in the slave trade, take this monumental step? A combination of factors played a role. The abolitionist movement, led by figures like William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson, raised public awareness of slavery's moral atrocities. Religious groups, particularly Quakers and evangelical Christians, emphasized its spiritual wrongness. Slave resistance, including rebellions like the Haitian Revolution, demonstrated the unsustainability of the system. Economically, Britain's industrialization made the slave-based economy less profitable, while the Napoleonic Wars shifted priorities. Ending the trades weakened rival colonial powers and bolstered Britain's image as a moral leader on the global stage. These factors culminated in the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in 1807 and slavery throughout the British Empire in 1833. Slavery didn't end in the 19th century. Today, an estimated 40 million people are trapped in modern forms of slavery, including forced labor, human trafficking, and child exploitation. Organizations around the world are working tirelessly to combat these practices, but much work remains to be done. The history of slavery is a testament to humanity's capacity for both cruelty and resilience. It's a story we must never forget, because its legacy lives on in the inequalities and injustices of today. By understanding the past, we can work towards a future where freedom and dignity are universal. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Peace.
Bread man, make myself your lively, is not a dead man.